Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, November 27th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Lebanon ceasefire goes into effect. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So at 9 p.m. Eastern time here in the United States, at 4 a.m. Beirut time over in Lebanon, an Israel-Lebanon ceasefire officially took effect, potentially ending an ongoing Israeli invasion and repeated airstrikes which have killed thousands and displaced well over 1 million Lebanese civilians. So this deal was brokered by the U.S. and the Israeli Security Cabinet voted earlier on Tuesday, to support it. This deal prescribes a 60-day ceasefire in which Hezbollah is to move its armed assets north of the Litani River, and the Lebanese government is supposed to deploy its army into the southern area of the country as a buffer between Israel and Hezbollah. Israel, for their part, is supposed to withdraw their ground troops from southern Lebanon and to stop attacking Lebanese territory. And as far as I understand it, they're supposed to do that withdrawal within this 60-day time frame. So we've been talking a lot about how Israel was demanding that they have freedom to act in Lebanon if they determine that Hezbollah has violated the ceasefire. But under this deal, according to these reports, there's a mechanism that if Israel sees suspicious movements of Hezbollah, they're supposed to report it to some U.S.-led committee. The U.S. is like overseeing this ceasefire, even though, they're Israel's strongest and biggest ally. It doesn't seem that it's not like they're a neutral party, but there's some mechanism where Israel's supposed to tell the U.S. about it, and then the U.S. Tells the Lebanese military about it, and then if the U.S. and Israel determine that they didn't do enough about it, then Israel would be free to take action. Still, that gives Israel, it seems like, a lot of leeway with this ceasefire. So the immediate question now with this ceasefire coming into effect, of course, is this thing going to hold? Is Israel actually going to pull out, or are they just looking to create some sort of calm for a little while? There was a statement issued by the Israeli military's Arabic language spokesman. He said that after the ceasefire went into effect, he warned Lebanese civilians against attempting to return to their homes in the evacuation zones, saying the prohibition is still in effect, saying that they can't return to their homes yet. So that's not a good sign. I still haven't seen any official word from Hezbollah that they've agreed to the deal, but it does seem like, based on what we've seen today, it seems like they must have. But now, again, Israel really ramped up airstrikes. All day throughout Tuesday, they were really bombing Beirut, areas of central Beirut that they didn't really target too much over the past year. And they also, right before the ceasefire went into effect, like a couple hours before, they bombed eastern Lebanon, and they carried out multiple attacks on North Lebanon on its border crossings into Syria. They've already taken out the border crossings in eastern Lebanon, but this is in northern Lebanon where they were bombing these border crossings, and they've all been closed now because of that. And that's not even an area where Hezbollah operates. So there is a question of, is Hezbollah going to respond to those airstrikes, or is that it? Hezbollah was firing rockets just a couple hours before the ceasefire as well. So we'll see. I'm recording this on Tuesday night here in the U.S., so it's early. It's been a couple hours now that the ceasefire has gone into effect, and so we have the live updates from Al Jazeera on the page as well, just so, because things could change overnight, obviously, while we're sleeping here. It's going to be the morning, the midday in Lebanon. So the latest update, it seems like it's still holding. The Israeli military says that it remains deployed in southern Lebanon. So they're saying they're still there. and for people not to go to their homes and not to approach the Israeli soldiers. So Amos Hochstein, the U.S. envoy, is saying some things, saying that the Israeli military is going to remain in place for now, and as the Lebanese army deploys there, Israel is supposed to withdraw. And he's saying that it's not a permanent ceasefire. So again, that's not the best sign that he's saying that. But essentially, what he's saying is that these things have to happen within these 60 days, or Israel's gonna ramp up, start attacking again. So we'll see what happens here. I mean, hopefully this thing holds. The violence has been horrific in Lebanon. We will see how this plays out. Again, I still haven't seen like an official, I could have missed it, but an official statement from Hezbollah. I'm sure we'll see them say something in the morning. But for now, again, it's only a couple hours, so things could really change overnight. So if you're listening to this show, on Wednesday, like most people do Wednesday morning, the situation in Lebanon, it'll become clearer by that time if this ceasefire is going to hold. All right, so the next one here, Israeli soldiers desecrate a church in South Lebanon. So this article is from Arab News. There was this video that went around. It was shared by this Palestinian journalist, Yunus Tir Awi, and he's a great follow on Twitter. He basically just posts and follows Israeli soldiers' social media activity and some of the things that they post of themselves burning down houses, blowing up buildings, wearing women's clothing in houses, displaced Palestinian or Lebanese women's clothing. Very strange stuff that these Israeli soldiers do. So he put out this video. Again, this is posted by Israeli soldiers of them desecrating a church, an Orthodox church in southern Lebanon in a village, dancing around, pretending like they're doing a wedding. And, it's just, gives an idea of their conduct. And, there's a lot of Christians in Lebanon that have been really affected by this war, this invasion, and these Israeli attacks. All right. So the next one here, getting into Ukraine, Biden wants $24 billion more for Ukraine. So they're looking for more money to fund this proxy war. The Biden administration has asked Congress to approve $24 billion in additional spending on Ukraine as it's working to ramp up the proxy war as much as possible during President Biden's final weeks in office. So Politico Pro obtained a request from the White House's Office of Management and Budget that asked Congress to include additional Ukraine spending in a continuing resolution that's expected to be voted on next month. 2 congressional aides said that Congress received the proposal on Monday. So they're asking for $24 billion, and $8 billion of that would be for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. And that's a form of military aid that allows the U.S. to purchase weapons for Ukraine. And then there's also $16 billion to replace U.S. military equipment that's been sent to Ukraine. So that could allow Biden to use the remaining, I believe it's about $4 billion, might be a little less now, in this presidential drawdown authority, which allows him to send weapons to Ukraine straight from military stockpiles. They're saying that they need to replenish those weapons that they send. So this would give them plenty of money to do that as they're trying to ship as many weapons as possible to Ukraine between now and Trump's inauguration. So if Congress agrees to this request, which I'm not sure if they will, I mean, I don't know if they're going to go ahead and pass $24 billion for Ukraine during this transition period, but you never know. I think the Democrats would support it, obviously, so there might be enough Republican support as well, but they would have to get it into the resolution, which I think could be difficult if there's opposition. I think if it comes to a vote, it probably would pass. So according to the publicly available data from tracking this thing, this $24 billion, if authorized, would bring total U.S. spending on this proxy war to $210 billion. And again, that's just from what we know. And that includes, there was the $61 billion in that foreign military aid bill that Biden signed earlier this year. And before that, the U.S. spent at least $125 billion on the conflict. So I added that all up and got to $210 billion if this thing is passed. So U.S. officials have told the Washington Post that the Biden administration is trying to put Ukraine in the best position possible before President-elect Donald Trump might push for an end to the war. U.S. officials acknowledged that within a few months, Ukraine could be pushed into negotiations and could end up ceding territory. So they're doing all this, according to what these officials are saying. They're expecting Ukraine is probably going to be pushed into negotiations soon, but that doesn't stop all these insane escalations that they're going through here. That we know the ATACMS strikes aren't going to make a difference on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine, but it risks this big escalation from Russia in response. So the next one here, so Biden's looking for $24 billion to spend on the proxy war. And then the next story here, a poll finds that the majority of Americans support ending military aid to Ukraine. And there's also that recent poll that the Ukrainians want to negotiate to end the war as soon as possible, a poll that found the majority of Ukrainians want that to happen. So this is from the American Conservative. A CBS News / YouGov poll has revealed that most Americans support ending U.S. military aid to Ukraine. The poll, which was conducted November 19th to the 22nd, found that 51% of Americans believe that the United States should not send further weapons or military aid to Ukraine. At the same time, 49% of Americans back further military aid to Ukraine. The finding comes at a time when the Biden administration has rapidly escalated the conflict. All these things we've been talking about, the strikes, the ATACMS strikes, and the anti-personnel landmines. The poll found that an even higher number, 79%, believe that finding ways to limit aid to Ukraine should be a priority for President-elect Donald Trump's transition team. 33% said that it should be a high priority, while another 36% held it to be a medium priority. So 79%, 51% thinks the U.S. should end military aid to Ukraine, but then 79% believe that the U.S., the incoming administration, should find ways to limit aid and wind it down. So clearly a lot of support for ending this thing. So, again, this is just interesting to see in light of Biden trying to get this $24 billion. And, one thing, we talk about, we try to figure out if the Trump administration is really going to end this war, but he did campaign on ending it. And I know a lot of people who voted for him because of that. So people voted to end the war in Ukraine. But the Biden team is trying to do everything they can to keep it going, to escalate it in this transition period. So the next one here, Ukraine hit Russia twice with U.S. ATACMS. So Russia said on Tuesday that Ukrainian forces fired U.S.-provided Army tactical missile systems, or ATACMS, into Russia's Kursk Oblast twice in recent days and vowed there would be a response. The Russian Defense Ministry said Ukraine fired 5 ATACMS against Russian S-400 defense systems on November 23rd. The ministry said air defenses intercepted 3 missiles while 2 hit their targets, resulting in the damage of a radar station and the injury of several Russian troops. 2 days later, on November 25th, Ukrainian forces fired 8 ATACMS at a Russian airfield in Kursk. The ministry said 7 were intercepted while 1 hit its target, damaging infrastructure and wounding 2 Russian soldiers. So they're sharing a lot of details about these ATACMS strikes. And the Russian Defense Ministry said that retaliatory actions are being prepared. So these are at least 2 more ATACMS strikes after the initial one that happened last week, which targeted the Bryansk Oblast. Putin said there wasn't much damage or casualties in that, but he did say there were casualties and deaths, actually, when Ukraine fired the British Storm Shadow missiles. So despite all these warnings from Russia, they're not backing down here with these ATACMS strikes. And again, they're saying that there's going to be retaliation. And Putin said, I know I've been really hammering this point, but I think it's very important here. Putin said last week that Russia has the right to strike the military facilities of the country supplying these missiles. And it was basically as a warning for them to stop. And they haven't stopped. They've just continued, and now they say they're planning a retaliation. What that retaliation might be is not clear. We saw them fire that new missile, that intermediate range ballistic missile. The Oreshnik, I believe, was the name of it. I didn't put the name in here. But this is, we actually have a story on the lower part of the page about how, from Reuters, the Russian missile that they fired carried warheads, but it did not have any explosives. So there was very minimal damage. And I remember trying to figure out if there was much damage from the strike, and it didn't seem like there was much, even though they're trying out using this new missile, this new ballistic missile. That report says that when a country wants to test a new missile, a lot of times they'll fire it, with empty warheads. They put some kind of instruments in there so they could track certain things. And Putin did say that it was a test. But I mean, that's also a warning. Firing a missile like that with no warheads is kind of saying, look what we got. We could pack this thing with some serious, firepower and do some real damage. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that missile with some warheads, with explosives fired into Ukraine. That could be a potential response. All right, so the next one here, the Kremlin says talk of the U.S. giving Ukraine nukes is absolutely irresponsible. So on Tuesday, the Kremlin responded to a recent report from the New York Times that said U.S. and European officials had discussed the idea of giving Ukraine nuclear weapons, calling the talk absolutely irresponsible. So this report from the Times cited anonymous sources and said several officials suggested the idea while they were discussing steps to deter Russia, but noted arming Ukraine with nuclear weapons would be complicated and have serious implications. So Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said in response that the idea of sending nukes to Ukraine probably came from a fringe extremist flank among Ukraine's Western backers. He said the talk was absolutely I'll read the quote here. He said, quote, it was absolutely irresponsible deliberations by people who probably have a poor understanding of reality and who do not feel a shred of responsibility for potential consequences, end quote. So this report said that Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the Soviet Union. Well, those nuclear weapons, those were Soviet nukes that were left in Ukraine's territory, and they agreed to transfer them to Russia. So it's not like the U.S. can return those exact nukes back to Ukraine. The way the framing there is kind of strange. But, I don't think there's any serious that they're seriously discussing this. But the fact that they talked about this and leaked it to the media, or, that they planted this story just to kind of escalate tensions, is really something here. It got some attention from members of Congress. And I think that's thanks to Kyle Anzalone, because Kyle Anzalone wrote a story for us about this on Friday, and it got picked up by Zero Hedge and then just went everywhere. And there were some members of Congress who quote tweeted that Zero Hedge story, which was written by Kyle for antiwar.com. There was Senator Mike Lee from Utah said in response, quote, if true, this is treasonous. That would have caused World War III if Biden sent nukes to Ukraine. The presidency has too much power if it can act unilaterally, make a non-emergency decision that's tantamount to an act of war, end quote. And of course, this report, tensions are high as things are. And then there's this talk of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. It's just completely crazy. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills 22 Palestinians across Gaza. So the violence continues in Gaza every day, dozens slaughtered. Gaza's civil defense agency told Al Jazeera that Israeli attacks killed 22 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip on Tuesday. Gaza's health ministry said in its daily death toll update, which is released about midday Gaza time, that at least 14 Palestinians were killed and 108 were wounded. The ministry's numbers only account for the dead and wounded Palestinians who were brought to hospitals and morgues. And like they always say, they said that there was a number of victims under the rubble and on the streets. Picture here at the Al Ali Arab Hospital. after strikes in Gaza City. There was a lot of casualties. Israeli attacks on Tuesday included a strike on a school sheltering displaced Palestinians in the Zaytun neighborhood of Gaza City. At least 11 Palestinians were reported killed in the attack, and over 40 were wounded. In Jabalia, northern Gaza, 7 people were killed and others were wounded in a strike on a residential building. At least 1 was killed in Beit Lahia. Strikes also hit central and southern Gaza, killing at least 2 in the Nusret refugee camp in central Gaza and 1 in Rafah. And I see strikes when I was looking at the Al Jazeera updates before. Strikes continuing in Gaza on Wednesday. No ceasefire there. Doesn't seem like there's any chance of anything. Just an absolute nightmare in Gaza. All right, the next one here, the U.S. bombs Iranian-aligned target in Syria. So the U.S. bombed Syria on Tuesday. The U.S. military announced that it launched a strike in Syria against an Iranian-aligned target, marking at least the 3rd time this month the U.S. has bombed Syria. U.S. Central Command said the strike targeted an Iranian-aligned militia weapons storage facility, and they're referring to the Shia militias, many of them Iraqi Shia militias that operate in Syria. The command said the bombing came after a U.S. base in Syria came under attack. So the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported the strike, saying that U.S. forces based at the Al Omar oil field, that's right, U.S. troops are based at oil fields or occupying oil fields in eastern Syria. They said U.S. forces there launched missiles at positions of Iran-backed militias, and they said there was no casualties reported in the U.S. strike. The observatory, sometimes their numbers aren't correct, but if they say there's no casualties, and I haven't seen any other sign that there were casualties, that means there probably wasn't. A day earlier, there were reports that a U.S. occupation base in al-Shaddadi in the northeastern al-Hasaka province came under attack, and there were no reports of any U.S. casualties, and it's unclear if any damage was done, but the U.S. still responded with airstrikes. Earlier this month, the U.S. launched 2 rounds of strikes against the Shia militias, and at least 9 people were reported killed in those, also by the Syrian Observatory, which those numbers aren't confirmed, so we don't know if that's exactly right, but it gives us an idea that some people were probably killed in those strikes by the U.S. So the U.S. has about 900 troops in eastern Syria as part of an illegal military occupation and backs the Kurdish-led SDF, allowing the U.S. to control a significant portion of Syrian territory. U.S. troops in Syria and the 2,500 U.S. soldiers in Iraq are vulnerable for attack and, of course, could be a tripwire for a wider war in the region. From October 2023 until February of this year, U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria came under hundreds of rocket and drone attacks due to U.S. support for Israel's genocidal war in Gaza. After 3 U.S. troops were killed in an attack on Tower 22, a secretive base in Jordan on the Syrian border, Iran and the Iraqi government pressured the militias to stop, and the attacks have been less frequent since then. But kind of recently, it seems like they've stepped up in Syria. And the U.S. has really been launching a lot of airstrikes. So another situation that could escalate. All right, so the last story here, the U.S. Navy flies a plane over the Taiwan Strait. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet said Tuesday that it flew a P-8A Poseidon surveillance plane over the sensitive Taiwan Strait in the latest U.S. provocation in the region. China's People's Liberation Army, the PLA, criticized the transit and said that it deployed ships and planes in response to track the flight. Colonel Cao Jun, a spokesman for the PLA's Eastern Theater Command, said, quote, "The Theater Command mobilized naval and air forces to monitor and remain vigilant throughout the U.S. aircraft's transit, effectively responding and handling the situation," end quote. So the U.S. always frames its military activity in the Taiwan Strait as routine, even though it's highly provocative to China. And the U.S. sends warships. They actually send ships through the Taiwan Strait more often than planes. But it's kind of used to be very rare that you would hear about a U.S. military plane flying over the Taiwan Strait, but it's been a lot more common lately. The last time it happened was in September, so 2 months ago. And I remember for a few years writing about this once in a while, like sometimes once every 8 months you'd see this. So it seems like they're doing the surveillance flights a little more. And then the last time that a U.S. warship went through the Taiwan Strait was in October, and they were joined by a Canadian frigate. The U.S. is getting its Western allies to increase their military activity near China in these sensitive areas like the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. And that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from David Henderson, one of President Reagan's best foreign policy decisions, about when Reagan called Begin, the Israeli prime minister at the time, in 1982, about Israel killing civilians in Lebanon, and said he was going to withhold military aid, and he got Israel to change course. Can't even imagine Biden doing something like that today. One from Ted Snyder, new Russian missile delivers 6 warheads and 3 messages. One from Matthew Petty, Lindsey Graham's bipartisan vision to keep America in the Middle East forever. One from James Carden, what to expect from Trump 2. And one from Stephen Simon and Adam Weinstein, on the Middle East, will Trump follow his instincts or hawkish advisors? So please go check all of that out. Again, let's hope that this Lebanon ceasefire holds. Let's just check out the Al Jazeera updates one last time. This is just on like kind of the response to the ceasefire. Lloyd Austin hails historic moment. Some analysis about what Iran might do next. So no word of any strikes or anything like that right now. Again, this is late Tuesday night here on the East Coast of the United States. So anyway, that's it. And another reminder, I'm not going to do a show. There's not going to be a Friday show. I'm not going to record on Thanksgiving night, but I'll record on Wednesday night for the Thursday show. But anyway, so again, let's hope the ceasefire holds. Let's hope there's more ceasefires in other places. You can support this show by sharing it, like, subscribe, comment, tell your friends about antiwar.com. Follow us on X and Instagram. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.